The study session meeting for the Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Commission. It is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and it is presently 5:30. I'd like to thank the commissioners for their service. We'll begin tonight with item A1, discuss regular agenda items, which takes us to item C1, consider approval of the October 17th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Any typos, corrections, errors? Of note?
Can I make just a comment? So when we're getting all of the stuff and you have to punch every single button to get up, we don't have anything that just runs through. I couldn't find the minutes this time.
Sorry?
I looked for them. So you have to go in and
Yeah, click
on mine,
on each
and you
item.
have to click every single thing, and I guess I couldn't find it. And I didn't realize that you had the stuff on there this time. So can we get that back to coming all together and you just roll down through?
Yeah, one big PDF packet.
One big
No.
PDF packet?
Actually, the thing is, we are trying to follow what is our normal publication methods for city council. So Granicus, or where we post our packet, is basically where our official record keeping happens for posterity. Like if you go through Granicus, you can find all the older packets for all boards and commission as well as council. So to avoid the confusion we were having, which is some members were having very easy access through OneDrive or Dropbox, which we still provide, but there are others who were having hard time accessing those. We wanted to keep it consistent.
Even sending it to us, you couldn't do it in one? You have to do it in 10?
But you should still be able to access it through the OneDrive and Dropbox, which should be one file.
Yeah,
I'm with you, Pearl.
yes.
If y'all can find, then I'm
You go through
not,
OneDrive, it's one file. Talking about.
then I guess
That's
I'm
the
not
Granicus
finding
one.
one, I'm going in
It's
there.
just one.
That's what I want, is the one
Yeah,
file.
so that you
So I'm
also
not
should,
punching the right thing.
Or just the OneDrive app on the iPad.
and Linda, it might be because you returned your iPad, so we
Yeah.
can bring that back
I
to
have
you.
a Mac. I don't, I have enough of all of those things, so I
But
just would rather
let me
use one.
ask Brian this, do you know if she tries to access the OneDrive on her own device, will it still be, can she still access it?
That I'm gonna have to get with our IT department.
But that's where we do
It might
upload
have
the
to be on
full
my-
PDF,
Well, I've
like as
gotten it
one
on my
document.
Mac before, all in one.
So were you
Anyway, we'll
able
work on it
to?
later. We don't need to take up time for that, so.
I mean, it is generated, it's part of the OneDrive and Dropbox upload.
Okay.
So if you can access those two, sometimes the packets are just too heavy to email as one PDF file.
Well, sometimes I'll get it in two, Brian sends it out two different ways. One email has something and one email has another, or two or three things. Anyway, I'm just so confused over these lately.
And that's why we are trying to make it
Yeah,
go
yeah.
away from that 2 or 3 links and make it consistent that
Yeah,
everyone is
yeah.
getting that one link. And if you have your iPad, you should be able to access the full
Yeah, I use a
PDF.
Mac, okay. Got it.
Yep.
I'll work on it.
Thank you.
Any
Any
comments?
other comments?
We are considering the minutes, correct?
Yes. Yes. Okay, hearing none, we'll move to item C2, consider the request from 4480 Alpha LLC for final plat approval of Prescott 4480 Alpha Edition, Lot 1, Block A, addressed at 4480 Alpha Road, and take appropriate action.
Any questions on that item? It's just a single lot plot.
And just a reminder for my own purposes, and thank you for our legal update that we had previously, because this is a plat, it is different than the public hearing.
Yes, there is no public hearing required.
Okay, thank you for making sure I'm on top of that.
Yep.
All right. Well, take us back to item A2, discussion and direction regarding potential amendments to the landscaping provisions of the comprehensive zoning ordinance.
Oh, Kira, your microphone is.
Sorry about that. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kira McCardle, and I'm a contract planner to the Planning Department, so I will be presenting to you for the following 2 items. If you just give me a second, I will start the slideshow. Oh, wait.
And thank you, Kara, for being with us at whatever time it is in your time zone.
No problem.
So what is your time zone time?
Right now it's 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
So I'm GMT +4. And Ken, I don't seem to be able to share my screen. Is it possible for you to give me that permission?
Can
Sorry about that.
Like a bat cave.
You should be good
Yeah,
now.
no, it's like the
Okay.
Command Center Farmers Branch.
There we go.
Everything starts in there.
All right, can you see my presentation now?
No, you'll have to share your screen. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, yes, I am. There we go.
Yes.
Are we good now?
Yes,
Okay.
we can see it now.
Sorry about that. So, good evening, everyone. And today we will be talking about possible landscape amendments to the comprehensive zoning ordinance. This isn't a new topic, so I'll start by getting into sort of an overview of what we will discuss today, and then I'll go through the background of how we got to where we are. So we'll start with, again, like I said, with the background, and then go over the purpose of the amendments that we're looking at doing. And then to start this process and for the discussion today, really what we're going to be doing is talking about some analysis that staff has undertaken. And what we're looking for is direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission. If the Planning and Zoning Commission is supportive of staff making changes in the key topic areas that we've identified, and if they have any specific direction on each of those key topics. And then we'll wrap up by discussing next steps, and that would be and having a discussion. So in terms of background, this isn't a new project. We did begin this process in 2019. However, due to, and the item did come to the Planning and Zoning Commission several times during 2019 and 2020. However, due to COVID-19 and a number of staff changes, the project was put on hold. And now that we did feel that it was a good time to restart the work that we had begun on landscape revisions. So why does the city need to update its landscape requirements, and why does the city need to update its landscape requirements? So a number of reasons, but it really boils down to policy support and best practices. The city uses a number of policy documents to guide its operations, and those include the City Council Strategic Plan, which in fiscal year 2019-2020 did direct the initial review of the landscape amendments. And then also in the most recent strategic plan, the City Council, the strategic plan did direct the implementation of the sustainability plan, and this project would aid in the implementation of the sustainability plan. And then, as you guys are all aware, the city has four comprehensive plans, including the I-35 corridor vision study, and each of those do also have a lot of direction and support for increased landscaping. For instance, the I-35 corridor vision study does call for an aggressive tree planting initiative to take place within the I-35 corridor. Originally, when this project did start, it was on the list of Planning and Zoning Commission goals and objectives, so that is still there. We would still like to finish it up. And then also in terms of best practices for the city with stormwater management, we would like increasing the amount of landscape land and improving the landscaping with the city will only help us meet those goals. So every once in when we do adopt our policy documents which guide how we operate, we do need to take things down to the next level and look at our policy and regulations and see and evaluate if they are doing exactly what we want them to do to help us meet the goals that we've set out within our policy documents. So in order to start this process, or to restart this process, I should say, staff did sort of take a step backwards, and we looked at the landscape provisions of 10 municipalities within the region. And we wanted to see really how Farmers Branch sort of compared to the other cities within the region. So you can see the list of the cities there. So what we did find was that there were 6 areas that we've identified as key topic areas that we would like to look at in more detail and really come back to you guys, to the commission, with some amendments in each of these areas. And I will go into each of these areas in more detail as we go through the presentation. So the first is a sustainability focus. So changing the focus of the provisions in general to look through things through sustainability lens. The second is single-family residential landscaping requirements, which are currently not a part of the city's landscaping provisions. The third is site coverage. Fourth, setback. Fifth is irrigation, which is more of a sort of a technical requirement that staff felt needed some clarification. And then the last is the tree size and species list. So if you can see here on this chart, and this is a generalized, I guess, representation of some of the analysis in these areas that was conducted. Because we found that the city could improve in this area. It didn't mean that all the cities were performing better in each of these areas, but we did feel that in general, in each of these 6 areas, and I haven't included the tree species list here, and I'll get to that later, that there was some room for improvement for the city. For instance, with single-family residential landscaping, not all cities include that within their landscape provisions, but by far most of them did. One that does really stand out is the site coverage. The city of Farmers Branch only requires 5% site coverage, and that was really a fair bit lower than other cities within the region. If you'll notice, some cities also did have a range, and that's something that we could consider doing. And what that indicates is that within some land use zonings, some cities may have required 15%. For instance, often industrial type land uses had a lower site coverage requirement, and other zoning districts would have had a higher requirement. So where you would have had retail or commercial type districts, there might have been a higher site coverage requirement. So in terms of
Just a quick question. So site
Yeah.
coverage, I'm just wondering what is site coverage? Is grass site coverage? I'm just in my mind, I'm trying to think of what does that mean?
So grass could be part of site coverage, but normally site coverage would also include a certain tree requirement. So you might require 1 tree for every 50 square feet of grass. So the grass could be a part of that, but not all of it. There would be other requirements that would go along with it. And site coverage is also that percentage is not the entire site. It's the entire site that is not covered by the primary structure.
So if
Does
I
that give
may,
you some clarity?
yeah, if I may add a little bit to that, Kira, you brought a good point about the site, portion of the site that is buildable. So basically, when we do those calculations, or we would explain it in a way in the ordinance itself, you have a green site, say like a vacant site. Once you take out the setback and once you put in the maximum allowable lot coverage requirement on that property of whatever may be the acreage, there is a certain portion of the land on which you can build on. So the landscaping requirement would be calculated not on the whole site, however, it would be calculated based on the remainder of the site, like whatever is your portion where the building can be placed or sited outside of that area, then 5% of that or 10% of that or 15% of that has to be landscaping. And as Kira mentioned, as we get into the details of the provisions, which means what kind of ground cover would be required, what kind of trees would be required, landscaping islands for parking. So there are several ways those provisions will be looked at. So it's a combination of multiple things.
Okay.
So the sustainability item is one of the key topic areas that the city would like to look at. It went as we revise the landscape provisions. So, and this isn't necessarily something that would be a section of the landscape provisions, but rather a lens through which we would look at the plan itself, or the provisions itself as a whole. So the sustainability focus would be spread out through the entirety of the landscape provisions. And it could include a number of different items and tools. There's a lot of support for making these changes. So the City Council strategic plan, as I said, did call for the implementation of the sustainability plan. And then the sustainability plan itself defines the number of goals that it's trying to achieve. And a few of those goals that do relate directly to landscaping are reducing the heat island effect within the city, and also secondly, it's also the second is to increase the tree canopy within the city. There are other sustainability benefits to that as well through the provision of habitat for animals, and also the use of native species within landscaping. So the implementation options that we have to work with, where we could implement this tool, is increase of site coverage, requiring native and drought tolerant species to be used, and also some of the more recent best practices that you see in more recently reviewed or rewritten landscape provisions are things like rain gardens and requiring things such as permeable pavers. So single family residential, this is the second key topic area that we've identified. The current landscape provisions that we have, that the city is currently using, do not apply to our districts. And what an R district is we have 6 of them, and it's all the single family residential land use or zoning districts. So within those districts, the city currently has no landscaping requirement. And that this was something that originally, and how this project got onto the city's work plan, was that the Planning and Zoning Commission itself did raise this as an issue, that as some residential lots were getting redeveloped, they were getting all of the vegetation and landscaping was being removed, and it may have been mature at the time, and it was getting replaced. It was not being replaced. So you might have a new single family residential home put in an established neighborhood, and it would have no trees or no landscaping on the front lawn. So there are many benefits to including single family residential landscaping or requiring it. Neighborhood aesthetics. So if you require a certain type of landscaping, for instance, a shade tree on each lot, as time goes on, that does really add to the neighborhood aesthetics and the home value. You can, drive or walk down that tree-lined street. And it also increases the city's tree canopy cover, and which results in a reduced heat island effect and makes the area more walkable, especially during Dallas summers. So there are a number of 3 different ways we could implement this as we are revising the landscape provisions. One is, and we would like to keep this as simple as possible for aid in implementation. One is to simply require a number of trees within the front yard setback based on the residential zoning or single family residential zoning. So where you have a resident R1 lot, there aren't many of those in the city, but they are around. And those are lots that are larger than 1 acre. You could require 2 or 3 trees be planted in the front yard. Whereas where you have an R6 lot, our smallest residential zoning lot, you could require 1 tree. The second way, the second method is similar in nature, but it is perhaps provides a bit more flexibility in lot size, and that's to require a number of trees based on lot size. So one example that we saw was in Fort Worth, they required 1 tree for every 5,000 square feet of lot size. And then the last option that is sort of out there is that you require, similar to what we require within other zoning districts, is that you require a percent of the front yard setback or a percent of the lot to be landscaped. And one other thing to note that is a consideration within these districts for landscaping is that because there are no landscaping requirements for our districts, that applies to single family homes, but there are also a number of associated uses that can locate within our districts. One example is a school. Schools are a permitted use within our district, and therefore they are not required to have any landscaping either if they are within our district. So we sort of lose that control. So because we have no regulations in place, we lose that control over those other uses as well. So site coverage, this was sort of one key topic area that we identified that really did stand out. Farmers Branch had the lowest site coverage requirement of any city that we did look at. So it is low within the region. And there is a lot of support from sustainability plans, the comprehensive plans, and also, like I just said, regional standards, what other cities in the region are doing to increase that. I would also like to note I have a few more recent site plans that have come through the Planning and Zoning Commission on the next few slides. And it was quite nice to see was that I was difficulty finding a site plan that did only have 5% landscaping, and I'm sure they are out there. I'm going to continue to look, but most of the sites that we've had have considered recently have exceeded that requirement. So again, the benefits are the aesthetics and the increased tree cover, as well as stormwater benefits, especially in the more urban parts of the city. Implementation options, it's quite simple. I think it's a question of if we want to increase the site coverage requirement, it's a question of how much. That upper limit that we saw was about 20%. So it's a question of if the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council would like us to be a bit more aggressive and require something close to the 20%. And if we are to do that, we could explore the possibility of allowing some bonusing to take place if certain sustainability tools are implemented, such as rain gardens or permeable pavers. We could provide the opportunity to decrease the required amount. Or another option is if some sites aren't able to accommodate a full 20% of landscaping, we could allow them to pay into a tree fund or something of that nature for a portion of that landscaping that would build up landscaping within other areas such as street medians or street trees in other parts of the city. So the front setback requirement, currently the city has no front setback requirement. It is supported by the city's comprehensive plans. I think each of the comprehensive plans do really encourage street trees and landscaping along the street. And what it really in having a front setback requirement really achieves is it will improve the aesthetics of the neighborhood and increase shade on sidewalks. And I should explain what a front setback requirement is of, say, the 5% landscaping that is required, we could, or if we were to increase the requirement to 10%, we could say that 50% of that 10% needed to be within the front yard setback of the lot. So that would have it would result in the bulk of the landscaping being towards the main entry or main roadway entrance or front entrance of the building or structure. And we do recommend, if we are to pursue this, we do recommend doing between 50 or 75% of the landscaping being allocated to the front yard. We wouldn't want to do all. You need to reserve some that can be used as screening or buffering in other parts of the lot. That's also very important. But having a focus on the front really does improve the streetscape. Sorry. And then irrigation, we do currently have some direction related to irrigation within the current provisions, but it's quite vague. It currently reads that all landscaped areas shall be provided with a readily available water supply with at least one outlet located within 100 feet of all plant materials to be maintained. So there is something there. But a lot of the other provisions that we read did provide a lot more technical direction as to how it was to be implemented, but specifically said that there had to be an irrigation system installed, that you needed to have an automated irrigation system with shut-off valves and things like rain sensors that would help with the conservation of water over time, and also hopefully also encourage systems that will operate well and will sustain the landscaping, help it establish well and sustain the landscaping that is installed over time. Because if landscaping does die off, it then becomes sort of an enforcement issue on our end, because if the landowner doesn't replace it on their own, we will need to follow up with them to ensure that happens. So the last item is the tree size and species list. This is a topic area that we would like to look at. We didn't do a detailed comparison with other cities in the area, and to be quite honest, it's in part because within the planning department we don't have a landscape architect or someone who is an expert in this area. But however, if the city does undertake this and the Planning and Zoning Commission is supportive of it, the planning department would partner with the Parks Department that does have a qualified arborist on staff, and we would review all the species size requirements as well as plant species requirements to ensure that they we're using native drought-resistant species where possible, that we're requiring the right size when landscaping is installed, to help to ensure that the landscaping is able to establish itself successfully and be sustained over time. And that is the last item. So our question for our next steps in this process will be to go to City Council. We don't think that we'll make it there until January, just because we are getting into the holiday season and the schedules are getting a bit tight. Once we get feedback from City Council, we will revise the provisions accordingly and come back to P&Z and Council for further feedback. If we present a draft that P&Z and Council are happy with, we will bring them forward for a public hearing process for P&Z and Council to consider adoption. So with that, I'd like to open it up to the Commission for any questions or comments or direction you'd like to provide. And again, I guess our big question for the Commission today is the Commission supportive of staff undertaking work in the key topic areas that we've identified?
Thank you so much, Kara. I
Thank
do
you.
see that we already have some questions forming, so.
My one question is, how aligned is this, I guess in terms of coverage for the 50-foot lot acre or something like that, how is this in alignment with what the HOAs are asking for? Because some of the requirements that are listed here are not even required by the HOA, and then there's some things that you've mentioned here are required by the HOA, but not as part of the results that you're asking for here.
So if I could answer that question. So if you're within a PD district, so a planned development district, that does have its own landscaping requirements, this wouldn't apply. So what this applies to is this will apply to all other districts within the city, and it will apply to some of the PD districts as well. However, there are some PD districts that have established their own landscaping requirements, and if that is the case, then these will not apply.
So,
Does that answer your question?
to piggyback on that same question, because I live across the street from her, I have a front yard the size of this conference table, and I have 2 live oaks in it. One of them is dead, the other is destroying my foundation. My planned development zone requires 2 trees based on lot size, but then my residential, but if I were in the residential, you'd be making rules. So I'm wondering, how can we create a way that removes that inconsistency where if I'm in an R and it's a lot size thing, I don't have to put 2 trees in my front yard the size of a conference table versus a PD where I have to do that by law, and when that happens, Commissioner Bertle comes to my house and looks very disappointed at the fact that my trees are dying and I'm
2 live
mismanaging
oaks.
the resources. So
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, that it might be one PD gets one rules and the other, but to the extent this ordinance can address that inconsistency between Rs and
Right.
PDs and the silliness that is currently happening in
In an
other
HOA,
PDs,
right.
that'd be helpful. PD 99
Yeah.
to be specific.
Well, yeah, to comment on that, that's why, firstly, that's why we do want to work with a professional arborist and of course bring this information, the revisions back to you guys for review, is to ensure that we aren't creating a situation where that could happen. So ensuring that we have the right requirements for the different, our zoning lot sizes, and other zonings within the city as well.
Real quick, real quick on that, is it even possible to say that it's based on the size of the front yard? I know that's like lot line and setback line and property line, but like, can you even zone that specifically in a CZO that says if you have a front yard the size of a conference table, you get 1 tree, but if you have a front yard the size of 2 conference tables, you have to have 2 trees? Can you even be that specific?
I think if I may answer that question, Kira, because there is a twofold answer there. Because one of our slides, Kira, if you go back to the options you had,
Right, that was the
On
percentage of the.
Yeah, the
so there are
percentage is
certain
5%.
ordinances which does do that,
Right,
because they will do a kind of a scaled arrangement. If your lot size is between so and so and your front yard, because we will know that based on the setback requirement of that zoning district.
sure.
So if your lot size is within so range, and if that's the setback, which would invariably make your lot have XYZ front yard space, there is a method, one of the 3 options she had is a percentage of, okay, if your lot is this big, you get 1 tree. If your lot is this big, you may probably do no
But
tree.
the problem with that is that you get, so that, let's say they want to put again, a very large tree that's going to get, 5 stories tall and, 3-4 yards wide upon say. So I think that we can't just say 1 tree. I think that it must be divided into large, medium, and small, which I think we have. And I don't even know that your size yard should even have a mega tree.
I would
I
prefer
think-
not.
Yeah,
I
so
think
I
we are
think we're
moving.
pushing to-
I think we are moving in that direction because we have heard those comments and concern. And if you notice that the final recommended tree list, that's the direction. We are not going to recommend the same type of tree for the different type of lots because it's just not feasible. And that's where we will be working with a certified arborist from the Parks Department and also working with Commissioner Bertle on what type of tree is recommended for what type of lot and what type of scenario. Because there will be a menu board situation where the applicant or the homeowner or the builder will get to choose from.
Right.
The second aspect, what I wanted to address about the PD situation, which is existing. So the City of Farmers Branch have all these planned development districts, and they also have base zoning district, which is the R1 through R6 that she's referring to, Kira is referring to. So one of the tasks we have is to reach out to the city attorney's office because usually the PDs are written from a land use standpoint that if the PD has a particular standard, whether it's landscaping, parking, anything, screening, open storage requirements, if that standard is addressed within the PD, it does not fall back on the base zoning. However, if that standard is not addressed within the PD, then you fall back on base zoning. So in a way, out of the 108 or 109 PDs, there might be 50% of those which does not have its own landscaping requirements, and they would fall back on the base zoning landscaping requirement. My task is to work with the city attorney's office and finding out how we can address the rest of the PDs, which do have their own landscaping requirements. However, that does involve a lot more work, both on the staff side.
But our HOA is less restrictive.
If I may finish the explanation, what I was going through, thank you. So,
Bertle interrupted you, okay?
No, I did not
Don't
interrupt.
look
I
at me
asked
that
the
I'm doing the bad thing.
I just want to finish the conversation before we move on to the next one. So, for the PDs that you raised the question on the PD 99, which does have its own restrictions, it makes the process much more complicated because besides identifying the problems, there might be some benefits there too. There might be some additional requirements that we do not have in the base zoning, and rather than nullifying all of that, it would make us go through each PD and make sure, okay, what standards there are and which ones are problem ones, which ones aren't. So that is a step we would like to take with the city attorney's office. However, it might not be an easy yes and no.
So does that bring in the HOA portion of that, if there's an HOA within those PD districts?
So HOA or homeowners associations are private entities. So municipalities are government, so our ordinances, we enforce those, we control them. We have no control over homeowners association
my question.
regulations. Those are called restrictive covenants or CCNRs. They are enforced by those private entities. The city cannot.
So they
influence
don't
those.
take into account what the city has required? They just
And
go
is
their own
there,
way?
and there's no way to have that, to at least have that conversation about aligning it because there's contradiction in it. In the at request from Farmers Branch versus the actual HOAs. And then there's, again, the nonsense of how many trees you can have.
That is a city requirement, though. The requirement that
The 2 trees
Commissioner
is a
Jones
city
is
requirement.
referring to, that is a plan development zoning
Right,
requirement.
the HOA is less
That is
restrictive
not
than the
a
city.
homeowner.
HOA can't
Maybe
directly
we have a
conflict
tree.
with zoning, right? I mean, that's,
Trees.
Right, and
It would be in
the law of the
violation
city
as
will
well.
trump whatever the HOA wants to do.
Will it, though?
but they can build
She
upon it
said
and
no.
go further.
There is a mutually exclusivity. So if you go read through the land use law cases of West Coast, where there is very restrictive CCNRs, where even if the city does not require certain, I don't know, like beach properties and the land use requirements for beachfront villas and how they access their backyards and private beach properties,
Right.
those are enforced by CCNRs and HOAs.
Right,
The city just cannot trump that quote-unquote requirement.
Right, no, but what I meant was in our situation where we don't have, the HOA doesn't require 2 trees, the city's saying we have to have 2 trees.
Yeah, so it's not
That's a
really the
requirement.
situation where city is null and voiding the homeowner association requirement.
Right, right.
It's more like the city's requirement, city can enforce.
Right, because there's, and
Yeah.
for us, it's an absence in our rules is filled with the city's rules.
How amenable are HOAs in working with the city on what the requirements are?
Again, that is a homeowners association, it's a private entity, and the cities cannot.
No, are they open?
The question was.
Are they open to working with the city as they put in their requirements? Or do they even ask you, what are your requirements? They're just going for it.
But isn't that a part of the approval process when we go through the zoning and they're building the new properties? Because I recall that being a discussion about the trees, then with the townhomes. So I'm just trying to put that in alignment, the townhomes with the trees, and they said they had the bigger trees, and I guess they were oak trees. But you were looking for different types of trees, and you said you would look over.
So
look
when
over
we
some
go
different
through
type of trees.
the,
It makes lots of recommendations.
Yeah, you're gonna go through some tree options, but see
I don't know
that,
if they're ever carried out, but.
those are
We can't- we
cities
can't share.
requirements that we are reviewing or the commission is reviewing when you are reviewing a site plan. And this
Okay.
is where I kind of feel like I have to channel my inner Kevin Laughlin, because seems like no training is enough. So we have to kind of review the plans based on what the city's rules and regulations are. We are not reviewing plans on any kind of homeowners association regulations because those are not the city's regulation. So the tree requirements for a townhome projects, that was the city's requirement, just like the PD 99 tree requirement. That's the city's landscaping requirement.
got it.
So,
Now that makes more sense,
Yes.
because, yes, I'm sorry, I
That's
just
okay.
didn't wanna belay that, I just wanted to make sure I was clear in my head.
so one question I had, Kira, I know we're talking about percentages and we're talking about numbers of trees. I've also seen other municipalities that have regulations around tree diameter as it relates to percentages. And I think that is in response to Commissioner Bertle's concern about tree size. Did you find that in any of the local municipalities? Because my knowledge of that comes from a different region.
Yeah, yes, for sure. And that is part of the review we would like to conduct. So for every, whenever a tree is installed or planted, or landscape is implanted, for every species there is what's called a minimum caliper size. And that can affect or impact how well or the tree establishes itself and how quickly it grows. And that is something that we do want to review as a part of this process. All cities did have requirements regarding caliper size for trees or shrubs. For, when you're looking at shrubs, it's usually sort of a gallon-sized bucket, the bucket size that it's in. But those requirements are there. They're in our current landscape provisions as well. But like I said, if we are opening up the landscape provisions, we might as well look at this and make sure that we're using the best practices that are being used in the region right now. So we would want to look at that as well.
Thank you for that.
So does this, given that Farmers Branch is mostly built out, does this really apply to new and redevelopments? And so it doesn't apply really at all to existing homes or?
No, so yeah, it would mostly, if any lands that aren't developed, it would apply to them and also to redevelopment as it occurs. So it would mostly, within the city, you're right, the city is largely built out, but it would mostly apply to in a redevelopment scenario or a scenario where there's a significant expansion or change happening to a building.
Kira, one other specific question. This is on the front setback requirement, so you might go to that slide. Regarding this 50 to 75%, help me understand the numerator and the denominator in that equation to get that percent. I was reading it two potential different ways. So in one case, I was reading it as the denominator being the entirety of the landscape coverage, and that of the entirety of the landscape coverage, that percent would be recommended in the front. And the other way I was reading it is for the entirety of the front setback area, that would be the required percentage that was landscaped. That's a very subtle difference.
Your first one is correct.
Okay.
So we would require that say 50% of the landscaping requirement be located within the front yard setback.
So when you have that.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for clarifying, and apologies at my confusion.
No, that's
The table of.
That's okay.
The table of
It's a lot of
cities-
numbers and
I'm sorry. The table of cities where it said 100%, that was just talking about the
front yard.
overall percentage. It all had to be in the
In the
front
front.
yard. Okay. That was confusing to me as well. Thank you.
Other questions that are emerging?
Well, do we get to talk about what we think it ought to work as to the percentages?
I don't think I'm allowed to, so you go ahead, Bertle.
We were, here. I mean, was that for tonight, that we were gonna talk about that, is to see what we recommended?
That's up to the commission. If the commission does have some direction or a preference that they would like to express to staff, then that would be great. If not, we'll go away and look at things in more detail and bring back some draft provisions that will which will incorporate what staff feels is the best way forward.
Well, then let me ask a question. So if we say, and I'm not for 50-50, I'm for 70 and less, because if you put a pool in, that's gonna be a heck of a lot of landscaping unless that you're gonna make a special thing for that. Because let's say if you say 50-50 or 70-30, if you still have to, and you wanna put a pool that takes up a pretty big amount of the yard, you still have to put 30% in there of the landscaping.
Sorry, I don't necessarily follow because I think the recommendation is topped out at 20% of the lot size landscaped.
Of the landscaping. But if you're saying, we just said 100%, that would be all in the front yard. 50-50, 50% in the front, 50% in the back. 70-30, 70% in the front, 30% in the back of the landscaping.
Right. The way that I read that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is
It's
of
only
the
the landscape.
required
Okay.
landscaping,
So if we have a pool.
not of what is the landscaping in existence. Does that make difference?
Correct. So if you had no landscaping, if you had only a pool, you don't have any requirement to have anything in the backyard.
Well, it depends on how I don't think
Yeah.
you're required to do it unless you stipulate that 30% of your overall landscaping must be in the backyard. And that would
Yeah,
be
that's
like,
not what we had. So, okay, got it.
Yeah.
and I personally am of the opinion that, and maybe I'm alone here, but I don't see why we would really care about what the landscaping and backyards look like. I mean, in terms of
I don't necessarily think so
zoning
either.
and ordinances for the city, I think that we should really only concentrate on how much we want in the front yard and then let
Agreed.
them
Yeah.
have their own.
See,
whatever
backyards
behind
with
the fence.
nothing but a fence.
Yeah.
Sure.
My backyard has nothing but
I
a
think
fence.
We did talk.
Maybe one of my live oaks is gonna go back there.
I think it's,
And I think if I could add a little bit of clarity, I think that where the percent landscaping in the front yard will apply the most or have the largest impact will be in the non-residential zoning areas. So this would apply also, for instance,
Got it.
to commercial and industrial and mixed-use properties. So creating that streetscape within those areas. And as I said, the reason why I think you see other cities, and I don't think I would recommend that requiring 100% at the front in those non-residential or non-single family residential zoning districts, is there are a lot of cases where you do want to do other screening on the property. So for instance, if there's a different use on the back, so if you were to have and just trying to think something, an industrial property that backs onto a residential area. So we do have that. I think it's the B Street backs onto a an industrial area on the other side. You might want to encourage the industrial properties to install some landscaping on that side. We do require that certain areas be screened. For instance, any kind of utilities that are visible, we do like for those to be screened. So I think that in those non-residential or non-single family residential, zoning districts, it's good to have to leave some of that landscaping allotment to be scattered through the rest of the property to aid in screening, but also in beautification of the rest of the lot.
I think you jogged my memory, the condos off of Valley View, they put up some screening between the residential homes on Epps Field and those like 3-story condos.
And Kira, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I want to clarify this because your swimming pool comment brought this up. I believe our landscape ordinance would have more like a generic statement also. For example, say your required landscaping, whatever percentage we end up with, is say 10,000 square foot of your lot area. and 50% or 70% of that required landscaping is in the front yard. However, if it turns out to be a small square footage in terms of absolute land area, and you do have a swimming pool or some other improvements in the backyard, which makes sure that you have already met maybe your landscaping requirement. However, if there is land left in the backyard, it would still be treated, like it would still be finished with either some form of ground cover or something,
I would
right?
hope,
Rather
yeah.
than,
I would hope, yes,
yeah.
yeah. Otherwise, it's a pretty hot
Yeah.
area back there, yeah.
It's gonna be like a unfinished pavement, but that's where some people do Japanese gardens.
So this isn't just residential, because I remember we did someone brought in a plan for a hotel, which did not ever materialize. And I remember they did not have grass or something in the back. They had rock. And the comment was made, that'll be just hotter than blue blazes on your people there. The hotel didn't go in, but they did not have that grassy area, I guess,
Yeah.
for some reason. I can't
So,
remember.
I mean, we kind of have to think about like a combination, because some people will do like a different style of landscaping, which might have more non-living material versus grass or plant. So we do have to acknowledge that.
The rock, you mean, or the granite, or the whatever, yeah. That's just, yeah, but they still have greenery of some sort,
Yeah.
even positioned into there, as a rule, even if it's very,
But what if someone wants to do just like paving? Sometimes they can do like paving blocks.
Is that in the rear?
Yeah.
So
We did see, it was interesting, and we did see some cities, and this is something that the staff could look in as well, that had a requirement that certain areas of a lot be permeable. And that was, I think, implemented more in residential areas, but for instance, the side yard, and I believe the front yard, other than sort of a walkway and a driveway, had to be made of a permeable material. I don't know that it went into rock versus grass or to, but it did direct certain areas to be permeable.
Like
So that's something that we could explore as well.
right, needs to be.
Well, I think we know that we have issues with stormwater drainage here, so
Right.
it behooves us to.
Well, I know that I wouldn't be able to vote on any of this right now. I mean, this is all so new, and these percentages and these
Sure,
setbacks, it's gonna take more for me anyway to really kind of get my mind around what all this means.
Well, I think to your point, the purpose of today, as I understand it, is for us to consider, are these areas of consideration meeting
Yes.
our concerns around the
So in general,
landscape?
trees and landscaping and,
Yeah, well, they'll do the work on it and bring it back.
right.
You gotta appraise
So
it.
Good.
one question I might have around this, we've mentioned many times the benefits and, the support and then benefits. The way you set up was very nice. I wonder if, considering, again, the significance of the stormwater maintenance management as a benefit, which I think applied to basically almost every one of these, if that as a goal is potentially worthwhile of inclusion as a point here. In other words, that would get to your permeable surface area. And I could be wrong, it might not fit into the way that you've organized it, but it's just showing up so consistently and with that being a known issue in our municipality.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's I just made a note. That's something we can work to include as I said when I talked about sustainability. I don't think it's something that we would have a sustainability section. It's more a lens through which we view the section as we look at it and review it. And I think that you're completely right. Stormwater is another one of those sort of lenses that we should be looking at the landscape provisions through as we go through and make some suggested changes.
Yeah, I think one thing we did with the parking update was where we had the sustainability options, we gave them the bonuses, which is if you're asking for more than 10% reduction or want to go higher than the max required, then you have to do at least 3 of the provided options. And on the drainage side of things, because we recommended permeable paving in parking islands or parking lots, we stated that the Director of Public Works and Sustainability and Public Health will have to review it as part of the overall drainage plan. So that might be something we can follow a similar approach, but that's definitely one of the key goals as part of the sustainability as well as stormwater management. Landscaping.
Any other thoughts that emerged of any items that aren't on the list or any items that are on the list that we think don't rise to the importance of being one of these lenses that we're reviewing?
Oh, I just, when we visited Fort Worth, the south side, we saw an example of somebody doing something that we can aspire to. Are there municipalities that are doing things, you looked around us to see what our comparables are doing. But is there anybody doing anything out there that's like potentially different?
That's a great question. I know of at least one particular development, not a whole region, and so it doesn't rise to the level of a zoning, right? But a development that has made some of these specific emphasis and has things like bioswales that are water catchment and that sort of thing, and then like a rain garden where it goes down over time. I don't know. Those tend to be more at the development scale than at the zoning scale, just because it would be too challenging to implement a lot of those innovations with zoning.
Those have to be built in as you build a.
Yeah, as long as our code is flexible and it does recognize those tools to build in the mechanism for the
We did
private
that in our
developers.
parking and in our parking lots and things like that. Those things were put in as to options in which to hold the water onto the site rather than it running off. Or if they were going to do trees, so much around it was planted so we addressed that pretty heavily before.
And I think the way they're setting up, I'm sensing that the zoning would be permissive of those type of innovations and the things we would want to see. But that's a very good question.
But to go back to your question, I do think where you're coming from, like if any of the cities researched were kind of like really like pioneers.
Yeah,
in
even at the zoning level, just is anybody
in the
doing
landscaping
anything?
standards.
Yeah.
Can you think of the ones that we looked at that really kind of stood out and maybe not on the list?
Well, I would say on the list would be Denton.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I know the city of Carrollton, I think, had a very solid a set of landscape provisions. The other one, a city that I would say that I think provides a lot of options but wasn't on the list. We did look at it, but not included on the list in the end, is the city of Plano. They do offer a lot of options and incentives for landscaping, and which is an interesting way to approach it and encourage innovation. So
So that
those are
would
the
bring
ones
up,
that come to my mind.
that would bring up a question as to, because we are so built out and we would encourage existing homes to do this, could we give a benefit if they did that? Could that ever happen within the city? Like if I wanted to put in a bioswale in my yard or put it whatever, could I get kind of like the
I know,
kind
sort
of
of
like the
rec-
rebuild program, an incentive of some kind, like
Big.
new windows or something, I don't know. I mean, they give incentives for other things, but I think that if we want this carried over to the rest of our city, and we have such a problem, and we've addressed fences, we've addressed so many things that we want to upgrade with, could we think about, I mean, who do you have to go to ask that question? To give an incentive to people that own a yard right now and would like to do something and add in more landscaping or send a plan in, I mean, I don't know,
It's
just.
like something
Yeah,
city council
so
and then.
in terms of a
City council.
sorry, I was just going to say, in terms of a grant program, I'm not too sure what does exist. I know that actually one of our comprehensive plans, I think, did also suggest that we look into that further. But I know that the sustainability department, as part of implementation of their sustainability plan, they're going to be starting, I believe, a pilot project. Shrupa, do you know if all the approvals are in place
Yes.
for the tree project?
For
We-
this
um,
budget.
We
year.
just gave away 200 trees, and we're gonna do that, I think they're gonna do that every year, that's the plan. 200 trees,
Okay.
all you have to do is ask for them.
Yeah, so that would be, I guess, an example of something that I know of that's happening at the farmer's branch level.
Yeah.
So that's directed towards residential lots and providing the opportunity. It's not required that it go in the front yard, but it is working towards some of those sustainability goals that the city does have to increase the city's tree count.
But I think to add to what Commissioner Jones mentioned, it's probably more of a city council direction and policy guidance. I know Ms. Cook isn't here tonight, but the brief I have talked to her about incentivizing or kind of like the Demorable program for landscaping, I know even when you work with experts who work on like bond programs or like any kind of funded program, they say like your improvements have to be something that's permanent. And I remember one of our experts in a different city gave us this really easy to follow example or a kind of a pictorial is when you are going for a bond program to fund an improvement project, it said like say it's a structure, like it's a building, it's a municipal building, and you're trying to pass a bond. They say you have the model of the building on a cardboard, like a paper model. And the top is open, of course, and if you turn that model upside down, things that can fall off, like your
Are not
furniture
permanent.
and stuff, that cannot be funded.
Right.
And that kind of stayed with me. It's very easy to understand, and landscaping is kind of in that dicey area.
Well, sure.
Because once you install it,
may
there is
not
no
live or may-
guarantee
yeah,
they
yeah.
are gonna maintain it, they can remove it.
Well, and especially after this summer, you saw all this like
Huge amount.
well-established
Right.
landscaping die.
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes difficult for
Okay.
cities to
That's good
incentivize
information. Yeah,
provide a funding for
yeah, good
those
information.
programs.
Live oaks are still gonna die.
Water.
So, Kira, I will only mention this in passing, and if it's worth following up, we can do so offline so that it doesn't take up this time. I did just attend the ACSP conference in Toronto, the Associations for Colleges and Schools and Planning, and I did attend a fascinating talk where a municipality in California, albeit, was incentivizing residents specifically for tree planting. And documenting and certifying that the citizens themselves planted the trees according to the city regulations. They had very strict requirements on how trees were planted and where, again, for the sustainability, and so they would take and survive. And they were, you can take this with a grain of salt, but they were using credentialing through NFT tokens. And were then
Non-fungible.
The-
Non-fungible tokens.
non-fungible tokens. And then, much like Ithaca dollars back in the day, if you recall, they were transferring those tokens. The value of those tokens was a municipal currency that they could then leverage within the municipality.
Did Pittman Water go with them?
Oh,
How?
that's very interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
So
That would
we
be
can
great.
talk offline, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
that we were talking about incentivizing tree planting. I was just in Toronto last week, so it was top of mind. So anyway, there are very creative structures because I think of Shrupa's point, you can't really incentivize that with bonds and other ways. So you have to be very creative in those programs.
No, for sure. No, that would be great to chat more about that.
Okay, fantastic. Any
So
other
with that-
discussion? Yeah.
Oh. Are there any other questions or comments? No,
As a body, are we generally in
Go ahead.
support of these? Are
Yes.
we getting a favorable response?
Yes.
Very much so.
Any,
I would only like to add and confer with Commissioner Pedraza that the backyard, I think, is,
In
It may be,
residential
I think,
application.
right.
to the extent that it can be, I would include the side yard as well.
And I don't think any of the ways that we've presented it, other than having some overall
For
percentage.
clarification, I'm
Yeah,
in agreement with her.
Okay.
Okay,
well, we look forward to
thank you
hearing
very
what
much.
city council has to say.
yes, for sure. So with that, I'll move on to
All right,
the
item-
next
Yeah.
Sure.
item.
Item A3, discussion directions regarding potential addition of a tree preservation provisions to the comprehensive zoning ordinance.
Okay. Oh. Just give me a second, I accidentally just closed it.
Happens to me every time I teach.
While she looks for her presentation, does anyone takes 35 from the Valley View ramp when you were traveling north?
Yes.
Yes.
Didn't get here today.
Have you noticed the property along?
Yes.
No. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
mean at 35 in Valley View?
Not exactly at Valley View, but once you get on the ramp, or even if you are on the service road, which I think they have closed for this temporarily, the address, and I don't want to go on record to mention the address, there would be a property, it used to be a closed warehouse furniture store. All the mature trees are chopped off,
Oh, I
like
saw
the
that.
top.
It looks like what they did at Cube Smart over by the Home Depot.
So I know this morning at our staff meeting, I was telling Kira that how mad I was when I was, last week I noticed that. And that was a result of kind of how helpless we feel that without this kind of teeth in the ordinance, what we are reduced to, this property owner or the current property owner had reached out to us at the beginning of the year, asking if they could just cut down the trees. And I started doing site visits for them, like first in March, and then the last one I did was with first one I did with code enforcement officers and 2 members from the parks team, where we visited the site and walked the site with them, told them, no, we don't see any conflict. You still have visibility because these are mature trees. As long as you limb them up clearly and kind of maintain it nice, your property is still visible. And we told them, no, you cannot cut the trees. And then this recently, I think last month, I again went with another one of my colleagues from the community services team, Daniel Summers, did another site visit and told them, you cannot cut the trees. They had already limbed up by that time, but the foliage was there. They were asking if the trees, some of the limbs are going over the roof. We said, yeah, you can kind of trim them, that way they're not going over the roof, but don't cut them. We gave them the recommendation of the I-35 corridor vision study, that's one of the recommendation of the vision study, that we have to do aggressive planting to beautify the corridor. And absolutely for the properties which have mature trees, that's an asset to them. Their front of the building, or where the main entrance is, not the drive, where kind of the main door, and that portion is totally open, like there is no trees blocking the main view. So then after that, when last Wednesday, I think when the SSC meeting was, I came in for the meeting and I was driving back and I saw it. I totally lost my mind. I was like, I cannot imagine. We did on this site visit, we told them verbally and via email, you cannot cut the trees, and this is what they did.
Any idea, what kind of trees were they?
They were all live oaks.
Big.
There were like 6 or 7 of them.
Do you remember they did that at Cube Smart to the live oaks too? So they've
Oh,
talked to
yeah.
them.
Oh,
They haven't cut
absolutely.
them down, but they've cut the
Yeah.
entire canopy
Yeah,
off.
so it's
they
all
just,
like if you take a
twigs.
cauliflower and chop off the florets, the stick, that's what it is.
They
But-
still
Some
have,
people
like-
think that will make them,
I don't know how that adds anything to because the building isn't even a nice looking building.
And I don't know if they'll survive. It reminded me kind of some of the way that the trees looked after the tornado over by North Haven, Gert. And a lot of them were shredded.
Yeah, once you chop off the full foliage, I don't know whether, I mean, they might sprout some
misshapen,
leaves
though.
here
They'll
and
never-
there.
they'll never get their
They'll
shape
never
back.
be.
They'll never look the same.
even if you limb them up, it
Yeah.
misshapes the tree. People just don't know what to cut off and not to cut off.
They didn't, I mean, they cut everything.
They
just
cut
cut down
everything. If
It
you,
looks like what
you
you do
can't
to
miss
Craig
it.
Myrtle
If you
were
get
talking
on
Craig Myrtle.
35, you can't miss
No.
it. It's like before. So that's why I told Kira, like, I don't know, when we take it to council, maybe I'll have the before and after photo.
So has anybody
Well-
talked with them?
Well, that's why we're doing this ordinance, because evidently the ordinance doesn't have enough teeth.
Right, so right now we have a lot of
Let's do this fast.
So yeah, I was going to, that will be an option for us to consider looking at within this presentation. So Shrupa, just to confirm time, we've got about 20 minutes, is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so I'm gonna get started and I'm gonna, just to give us hopefully a few minutes for some discussion, I'm gonna try and go through this pretty quickly. But of course, I am able to answer any questions that you have. So again, I'm Kira McCardle, a contract planner to the planning department, and this topic is on tree preservation amendments to the comprehensive zoning ordinance.
Kira?
So again, sorry, yeah?
Sorry to interrupt, but I know we just said like 20 minutes, but as we learned also last time, we can start the regular meeting a little late. We only have a plat on agenda.
Right.
So that helps. If you need another
Okay.
like 5-10 minutes,
Okay.
feel free to do that.
Okay, sounds good. We'll see how we do. Just to provide a little overview again, I'll go over some background. Again, this was a project that was started and then was put on hold for a while. The current provision, there's currently one provision in the comprehensive zoning ordinance that speaks to tree preservation. Why this is important, the analysis that we've done. So we have sort of, again, because the city doesn't have a lot of provisions, we went and looked at other cities in the region. We've sort of grouped things by general characteristics, and we grouped them into 3 categories, flexible, comprehensive, and then a third one that is retention or replacement. And then some question for some information on direction, next steps, and then some time for some discussion. So in terms of background, this project was, again, it was started in conjunction with the landscape ordinance or landscape ordinance revisions that were started in 2019. It was then at the same point put on hold due to the COVID-19 pandemic and staff changes. On August 22nd of this year, staff did go back to council to see if they still wanted us to work on this, and staff did provide direction to us that they want to continue to work on tree preservation. And I believe Shrupa also did bring the presentation that was brought forward to council to Planning and Zoning Commission, and presented the same information to the commission. Just for some information, in case you're wondering, we have separated the landscape provision amendments to the CZO from the tree preservation amendments to the CZO. We do hope that they do sort of progress in tandem, but separating them out does give us a little bit of flexibility should one set of amendments require further work, or there be concerns on the part of council or planning and zoning commission on either the landscape amendments or the tree preservation amendments. It would allow the other or one that with which the commission or council doesn't have concerns with to move forward and begin implementation. So we thought that it would be easier from a process perspective to separate the two. And a lot of the cities that we did look at, they also do separate tree preservation and landscaping. So the current provision, I'll read it briefly for the commission. All landscaping shall be maintained in a living, growing condition. Any landscaping that is removed must be replaced with the same or comparable species and caliber of plant as the one that was originally installed. So this is what is currently within the CZO. Speaking to with Sharupa and the story that she just told, it doesn't have a lot of teeth and doesn't really find a lot of, provide a lot of direction to either to staff or to landowners. So it does prove to be quite difficult to implement. The other thing that I would say that's quite out of step with any other provision that we did look at is that it only requires replacement of a caliper plant from when it was originally installed. Most landscape or tree preservation provisions that we have looked at do try, at least to some degree, to take into account the growth that it has taken place over time. For instance, if you put in a new sort of 3-inch caliper or small live oak, and it grows for 20 years, and then you remove it and you replace it with again another 3-inch caliber live oak, it's not the same thing. There has been some loss. It will take 20 years to get back to where you were.
So can I ask a question really quick on this? Is there any way, and I don't know that that's P&Z, but there are so many bird-planted species around yards and in alleys and in fences and things like that. We can't do anything to ask that those be removed, can we, in our landscaping plans?
You mean like naturally grown vegetation?
Yeah, like a
Squirrel buried.
a pecan tree, and it's growing up through the fence, or there's a hackberry, which are planted all along the fence rows that are growing up, and they're really nuisance within the landscaping and within the alleyways and things. I don't know that there's anything we as P&Z can do, but it would be nice if we could.
I think it's more of a maintenance issue at that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Probably.
Right, as a part of your regular maintenance needs.
That would be.
You can always.
Parks and the group, so, okay. Shoot.
What we can do, Linda, from a perception, from the perspective of tree preservation and the landscaping ordinance as well, is if trees are removed, we can provide a list of preferred species for replacement. Also, some cities, and we will get to this, even for removal, if you're removing something that's considered a pest, quote unquote pest species or an invasive species, you aren't required maybe to go through a permitting process for it, or there's no fee for the permitting process. So there are a number of things that we could look at doing that would discourage replanting of those species and not act as a barrier to those species being removed.
Well, we don't have them on the list anyway. Well, we have a pecan maybe, but we don't have hackberry, but, or anybody could give you a bunch. But I just was hoping we could do it, but I realize we probably can't, so.
Yeah.
But we do have where they can be planted, right? Some people plant right up on their houses, and are we gonna you have to have it so far away on our planting schedule?
Within the landscape provisions, for things such as trees, we would, yes, I mean, to prevent situations where, say, your foundation is getting cracked, we would probably require that it be, and that's part of why having it within the front yard setback would help with that as well. Have it distanced from the main structure by a certain amount. And we would work with the city arborist to help with that.
Am I missing something simple so I'm the guys who own that lot with the big trees. I dig them all up. What happens to me?
So that was basically, I was gonna say, that here's an idea, because if this goes through, the tree preservation ordinance, and when I presented initially in August, we did discuss, based on a council member question, that, well, what if someone has a damaged tree or something that's hampering their foundation, or it's causing structural damage? So there would be a list of exempt trees, if you will, that you do not have to preserve. So those you can cut down.
Right, no, that's not my question.
So
if can we go back to the slide that has the statutory language in it?
Theoretically, they need to replant 6
Yeah, you
live oaks
still
that are
have
only
to.
3
But
inches.
that, so does that then follow with failure to do so shall be a class 1 misdemeanor punishable by a $500 fine or 200 days in jail?
2000, yeah.
So there's a consequence for this?
Yes.
Okay.
However, the example I gave was a
Right.
different one because ideally they did not remove the tree.
Right.
They cut the top off.
Okay, so this line needs to change as it, when it was originally installed, it must be as it was currently when you took it out or did bad stuff to it.
Right,
And then
right.
the punishment needs to read, disfigurement of a tree is punishable by death.
Like how
I mean,
aggressive trimming, right? Those are languages that has to be built in.
Yes.
That when you say you need to maintain the tree and prune it,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't mean you aggressively trim it where there is no foliage left.
Right, so, yeah, okay, so, but there is a punishment if I remove it.
Yes.
And we need to put a
Monetary.
punishment if I aggressively prune it?
No,
A second.
right now pruning or that is
Right.
not defined.
Right, so we need to add a punishment for that.
No, we
And
just have to have
some
a
cities
language.
do-
Wait a second, Ben.
You know how they cut.
Sorry, I was gonna, and we will get to that, so some cities do have guidelines and potential fines for pruning or of trees.
Because if we don't have
so-
that, no
so-
one's gonna follow the rule unless there's a consequence to not following. the rule.
Right.
Yeah, you're correct. So that is, that is an option for us to pursue. Any other questions?
This is gonna sound like
Should I go
a
on?
very weird question. Does it have to be a live tree?
Sorry,
Does it have to be a live tree?
like a dead tree, you are allowed to
No,
remove.
a
your-
You're
rubber tree.
encouraged to remove the dead ones, actually,
Like,
in our.
Yeah, like a silk
An artificial tree.
Artificial.
It does not apply to artificial anything. Landscaping by definition of landscaping ordinance and the tree would be for living plant material.
Those would be considered sculptures technically,
Oh,
not trees.
Yeah.
By
Any kind of
definition.
beautification.
I think the goal of the tree preservation, and well, I guess this is the slide we're on, is to implement the city's sustainability plan, and one big part of that, or the part of that applies to this and the landscape ordinance is increasing or maintaining, and that's where tree preservation helps out, is in maintaining the tree canopy. The tree preservation provisions, if the city does pursue some, will not in itself necessarily increase the tree canopy, but it will help to maintain what's there. So is it okay if I go on? Yeah.
Yes.
So the goal of the tree preservation provisions are looking into them is to encourage the protection of existing mature trees. So like I said, to maintain what tree canopy the city has along the street space and maintain the city's character. So I mean, the city's tagline is "City in the Park," so we want to promote that as much as possible. So the city has reviewed, and we'll look at the cities in just a second, a number of tree preservation provisions. And we've sort of grouped them into 3 categories for our review and discussion today. The first, based on a number of characteristics. The first is sort of a flexible approach. The second is a little bit less flexible, and I've called it the comprehensive approach. It does include more have more characteristics than the flexible approach, and is perhaps a little bit stricter. And then there's a retention or replacement approach, which is we'll review a little bit, and which is very focused on retention of trees and replacement of any tree caliper inch that is lost. So we did look at 11 DFW cities. 10 of these are the same as in the landscape provision, the last presentation I just gave. If you're wondering where the difference is and why, we have added to this one the city of Denton. And there's a reason we added the city of Denton, is because they have a very, very comprehensive tree preservation ordinance and set of provisions. It's very detailed. They have a staff arborist who I think is sort of dedicated to this, and we'll go into some of the other characteristics, but we in order to see the spectrum of what's out there within the region, We did know, and there may be other cities that we didn't review that have something comparable, but we did know that the city of Denton takes tree preservation very seriously, so we wanted to make sure that we did look at their set of provisions. And you'll see that shown here a little bit. So we found of the 11 cities we looked at, 5 of them sort of took a flexible approach, 5 of them took a comprehensive approach, and then one of them, being the city of Denton, did take an approach where they were wanting to either retain the tree species there or have them replaced in wholly. So I will say, this is sort of, for purposes of this discussion, we've sort of generalized some of the characteristics. It is, I mean, as I'm sure you will understand, it is sort of a spectrum of characteristics. It doesn't mean that one city, if we class them as flexible, had every single characteristic in the flexible that we've listed in the flexible category. It also doesn't mean that they may not have had one characteristic from the comprehensive category. But this is just sort of the best way we could find to sort of group characteristics of each of these provisions together for us to digest as a group and have a discussion around. So characteristics of the, and I'll review characteristics of each of these approaches, and then some benefits and perhaps some disadvantages of each of them. So for the flexible approach, it was quite standard that any of these processes did have an application fee and a permit required. Within the flexible approach, it was really only required for healthy trees. Some cities did require, and I do see the validity in this, for any tree to undergo an application process. But if it was, say, a diseased tree or an unhealthy tree, that became any fees that were paid would be refunded. In the case of redevelopment, a tree plan is required so that all the trees on the site can be seen and evaluated. So that the city is aware of exactly which trees are being proposed to be removed. For most cities, it did apply in all zoning districts, and that was not for all. So some cities did not apply this within their residential zoning districts. And then again, the other part of residential zoning districts, and this is part of the discussions that staff had with Planning and Zoning Commission and Council in the past, is again similar to the landscape provisions. In a residential area, it can also just apply to the front yard. So it did provide some options. So there is an option to remove a tree and replace it on site. Also an option to contribute to something like a tree fund. If you weren't able to or did not want to replace it on site, you could contribute dollars to a tree fund that would go towards planting trees within a zone. So this map here does show the zones that were originally thought of for Farmers Branch or general geographic zones, west, central, east. So if you did remove a tree and were unable to replace it on your site, you could, even though staff would encourage that, you could pay into a fund. So the advantages are it provides some options for landowners. There are a number of ways for them to remove a tree for whatever reason, and to either replace it or pay into a fund. It may be easier to interpret and understand than some of the more detailed districts or sets of provisions. For instance, I know the city of Denton, their provisions are about 200 pages in length, so that's pretty, a lot to go through, especially if you're just a resident. I assume there's just a small section on residential, but it's keeping it simple. With the flexible approach, you try and keep it simple and straightforward, and it does address the sustainability and comprehensive plan goals that the city does have. The disadvantage is perhaps there's less protection for existing trees, less maintenance of the existing tree canopy, for a moment in time. If you are replacing or paying into the fund, that tree canopy would come back, but it may take a little bit of time. So for the comprehensive approach, so in this one, you would see most of everything that was in the flexible approach carry forward. You may see higher application fees be associated. You might see some cities trying to recoup some of the costs of going through the application process. That's always a big thing for administrations. So a higher cost. In non-residential zonings, you might require the replacement of diseased trees as well. So acknowledging that landscaping along the streetscape does need to be maintained, especially if you're a non-residential business type use within the city. At this stage, some cities did start to introduce a larger administrative review. So the level that I've put in here is sort of in some cities did require a DRC review. So that would mean that it would go forward. The DRC is a group of staff that meets from a number of disciplines. In the City of Farmers Branch, they meet once a week and they can discuss cases or applications that are coming forward and discuss any issues with them. So in a DRC review of a tree removal application, they might want to confirm the condition of the tree, where the tree is located, if it's necessary that it needs to be removed, and what the replacement and the replacement options for that tree are. You also see here the replacement requirements getting a little bit stronger or more stringent. So the replacement must be equal to the total caliper inches of the tree removed. Whereas in a flexible approach, you might have a simpler equation, have a range. If a 20 caliper tree is removed, you can replace it with 2 5 caliper inch trees. Here they're looking for full caliper inches to sort of be replaced. And then you do see the introduction, and many cities did have this sort of where heritage trees can be identified. So those would be trees of certain species normally that are identified as being important to the tree canopy of the city, and also species of certain sizes that they're wanting to protect. So if those trees are to be removed, there might be, again, even more, the requirements would be greater for their replacement if they are removed. So here you do see, again, there's a lot more emphasis and a lot more scrutiny on the applications. There's an increased level of protection for the tree canopy and the trees in the area. And it's a greater impact on the sustainability and comprehensive plan goals. So I think with the comprehensive, they are still providing some options, but they are really looking to retain trees more often, putting more effort towards that. One of the big disadvantages I would see is you start the city process starts to become a lot more involved at this stage. So it's a bigger process. It would take more staff time for implementation. So the retention or replacement option. So this was sort of this is again sort of coming from the city of Denton mainly, and again, so it would carry forward all of the requirements from the other 2 levels, and then also sort of and add some more. So the approval is required for the removal of any tree, and there's a permit fee associated with that. There's no tree fund alternative. Replacement of trees that are lost is required. A tree protection plan is required before any development project begins. This isn't so uncommon. And you do see this in some cities. I've seen it many times. As construction on a site or redevelopment on a site is occurring, sometimes you'll see a tree sort of fenced off. And that is to ensure that the land around the tree is not disturbed, to protect the root base of that tree. So you need to provide the city with a plan, and they would have requirements as to how the tree needs to be protected during construction. Would be large penalties for removal without a permit. The provisions would apply to the whole lot. As Sharupa said, we did see some cities that had this sort of more in the comprehensive range, but pruning of trees is restricted. So you might also need, there would be guidelines or a permitting process for any major pruning that's to occur. And again, here with the retention or replacement option, you see the administration process again sort of getting kicked up another notch. The establishment of a tree board. If you get a decision from the tree board that the applicant isn't happy with, there's an option to appeal a decision to City Council. So then also. They're looking at the applications from a level of scrutiny where if a removal of a protected tree would become unnecessary, if a development standard was varied, they may vary that development standard. So they could change a setback or something of that nature to accommodate an existing tree. So the advantage, this is really the highest level of protection of what we looked at for trees within the city. It is really focused on retention of what's there. And it would have the largest, again, a tree preservation policy. It really works on maintenance of the existing tree canopy. So from that perspective, it would have the largest impact. Disadvantages are it provides fewer options for landowners. We are a city that is largely built out, so there's a lot of redevelopment that does happen. So it might be hard for some landowners. It might also be difficult for staff to implement. And then lastly, like I said, those administrative processes really do kind of get kicked up, brought to the next level within the retention and replacement option. So that implementation, it does get to be quite complex. The image on this screen, I found this when I was preparing for this presentation, and I just thought that it was it's this slide and the next slide, a good infographic or brochure providing an overview of a city's tree preservation requirements. So this is from the village of Wilmette. It's in Illinois. I didn't read their preservation provisions in detail, but from this brochure, I would say they would fall within somewhere between the comprehensive and the retention or replacement sort of area. But I thought it'd be interesting for us to take a quick look at. So they do require a permit for any kind of tree removal if it's six inches or more. If your tree is dead or dying, or so if you do have a sick tree, then you are able to remove it without any costs. If you remove a tree, so this gets to penalties that we were discussing before, without a permit, there you have a maximum fine of $7,500, which is quite a large fine in my opinion. But I don't know how that compares to other cities. And then it does get into sort of the replacement. So they do define heritage trees. So within the city or village or city, it's any tree that's 20 inches or greater, and it's either a oak or a hickory tree. So those are the trees that within their community that they find are native to the area and grow really well. And also the replacement requirements are different. So they have replacement requirements for healthy trees that are on the list of trees that they've identified. So 10 inches or less, and they've tried to make it easy to implement. So between 10 and 12 inches, it's 2 trees off the same list, I would assume. 12 to 16, it's 3. 16 to 20, it's 4 trees that you need to provide. So heritage trees, it's an inch for inch replacement. So that's not uncommon from what we saw from some of the ordinances that we looked at. So if a 25 caliber inch tree is cut down, you need to replace it with 25 caliber inches. So that doesn't mean 25 trees, it means 25 inches of tree trunk that's measured at a certain level. And then they do have some regulations on the location of a tree removal. And they are mostly specific to heritage trees. So I just kind of thought that was sort of an interesting example to look at. And I thought that this city had done a really good job of breaking down their provisions for their residents so that they're easy to understand and to navigate their way through. So that's sort of the end of the presentation, and I now like to open it up to the commission. In terms of next steps, it is very similar to the landscape provision amendments that we're looking at. So we will again be going to City Council in January, we think, with this presentation to get some feedback from Council, and then we will hopefully get to work on drafting some provisions. And my main question for the commission today is, what approach to tree preservation does the commission feel is the best fit for Farmers Branch? So that flexible approach, the comprehensive approach, or that retention and replacement approach? Thank you very much, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Kira. Any opening thoughts on the approach?
I don't think we have time to really give that much debate or discussion, do we? It's a fairly big question. I mean, it's already 7:10.
I'm going to throw out the most strict one. If we are a city in the park and we want to maintain our canopy and we're mostly built out, I'm going whole hog, is my thought.
I support you, Bernal. I don't think the city council will, but I support you.
To get back to Commissioner Miller about the concern on time, we can stay here longer, or what we can do, we can adjourn the study session portion, go downstairs, and Madam Chair, if she's agreeable, then she can continue discussion of this item downstairs. And we also have another item that I do want to discuss with the commissioner, the third item on the study session agenda. So we can also tackle that after considering the plat. Or
Yeah, I feel as though, again, in the interest of time, I feel like completing this discussion, if we can, up here, just of course for technology reasons of getting Kira set up again downstairs. And then maybe picking up with item A4 downstairs, I think would perhaps behoove us if that's in the interest of the rest of the commissioners.
Whatever you want.
Okay, we will proceed forward. Thank you, though, for the note on time.
so we got the two responses who wants to go to the full range.
If we're gonna do it, we gotta do it. And there's gotta be a consequence for doing it, because if there's no consequence, people will not do it.
I think my read of it is that there's some space in between the comprehensive and the retain and replace. I know, these aren't strict categories the way you've defined them, and there are some areas of that may be more negotiable. Again, to your point, given that we are built out for the type of redevelopments that are high quality that we do want to see, I think we may need to have a little bit more flexibility potentially around having a contribution to a fund or other thing if it can't be explicitly met.
Well, that was in there, contribution to a fund.
That was in the first two. However, for Denton's example, they had no fund availability. And
Like
so,
a fund on it.
yeah, I think that there are maybe a few compromises or areas, again, to get the type of high-quality redevelopment that we want, given the build-out and the constraints that we'll be working with.
Oh, that was the one from Wilmette.
Well, that Wilmette brochure was very digestible.
Yeah, I love that, yeah. I
Wilmette
like
is,
it.
if that's Wilmette, Illinois. I saw the 847 phone number.
And that actually was in our first
that-
plan when we
that
first started.
Community is by far no comparison to Farmers Branch. The front, I guess the back setbacks, much bigger. So the development of Wilmette is such an old historical neighborhood that the preservation of their trees were from the very beginning of those trees. So they're planting a lot of old heritage trees in the beginning, which is why they are looking to preserve those. I think in terms of Farmers Branch West, these trees are not at that extent. I think maybe 20 years from now, you would want to have that preservation in place for those newly put in
They wouldn't be
trees.
heritage trees at this
Yeah,
juncture.
but that's what I'm saying, is that Wilmette is like a hot cocoa in the wintertime. That's what it is.
And I think to your point, we're establishing the policy that will be in place so that we reach that 20 years.
Okay.
And are there. So generally, these types of updates that are done to zoning are done infrequently. So we are really looking at a plan that is a 20-year, 30-year zoning update.
And we do have many areas of Farmers Branch that have very large old
Mature
trees. Many of our homes are 60 and 70, 60 years old at least. Let's see, they were built in the 60s. So yeah, they're 60 years old plus. And so we have many trees that are 60 years old. And if you look in where Bonnie and I live, we live in an area where they said 2 trees in the front yard, boom, 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 boom. And those are mostly not there anymore. So as we're planning now to put in things that will be maintained, will live that long, will beautify our properties. And ours are being redeveloped right now where we live. And so I think, thinking about what's coming up from our new areas here, and then ones that we already have
But
established.
to your point right there, it's a plan for right now, because we're redeveloping yours. It's a
Yes.
plan to make ours look like yours
Yes.
and not be undone.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's-
So we've got a
it's-
great opportunity here.
Right, and it should be the hardest to hardcore possible, because otherwise nobody's gonna follow it.
Also, the city takes care of a lot of their trees.
Well, I do think that the pay to get out of it, because like, for example, my lot, there is a tree that has not impacted our foundation, but it is fairly close to our home. It's not very far out, and I could see if somebody were to redevelop our lot,
Sure.
that one
Would come
tree, and
down.
it is probably a heritage tree, because it's one of the original live oaks that was planted in 67. And, but if you were redeveloping that lot, it would be hard to keep it, because of its proximity to the,
Well, that's the cost of redoing. And a home that they would build there may not require a tree like that, or that's in the way.
but you
So-
would want to be able to pay to remove it. You wouldn't want to have to immediately
Yeah.
replace it with something with a similar caliper, because that would be
No,
cost
no.
prohibitive.
But you
in
can add
itself.
into then the fund.
Sure, you could
Yeah.
pay $3,100 or whatever. I mean, if you were redeveloping it, that would be a
Yeah,
drop in the
that's
bucket,
minimal,
right? Like-
yeah.
So is there anyone-
Goes to my question though about where so earlier I asked Bert on a side conversation, I'm sorry, sure, but about where these trees, so you pay to get to go to a fund, but if it's just to buy 200 trees and we hand them out willy-nilly, would this fund then have to come with a plan to, we're going to replant in a controlled and designed fashion, as opposed to here's a tree?
Yeah, so these two
Yeah.
programs
Yeah.
are separate. Go on.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Teruba.
Could be one of those.
No, I think those two programs are gonna be separate. So the tree
Yeah.
program that Linda,
No, I understand
Yeah.
that, but
Okay.
when your tree needs to be removed and you wanna pay money into the fund to get rid of that tree, what happens with the money in the fund?
Right.
so that's the city would be responsible because city would be the holder of that fund. And the 3 zones that Kira had shown, the original plan was if a tree is replaced or a fund is paid in the fund for a west side resident, then the replantment would occur along a city-owned, like a street median or a streetscape tree within the west side.
So we would
Or-
take it from my front yard, front yard, and it would go in the median. Like
So
we get a
that's-
new tree in the median.
Right, right.
Or a
And-
park.
Or a park,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
a street tree which may not be on the median or the side of the street.
Okay.
Or it can be neighborhood focused as well, like,
Interestingly, and I know that this is a totally different conversation, but you talk about like landscape revitalization, and then you talk about taking these funds, and I know that like tree to tree, but $3,100, for example, for removing a huge tree, that's gonna buy a lot of trees to plant in one area, but if you were able to somehow segue that into this landscape revitalization plan too, I don't know, it's an interesting.
Just needs to be some more plan to it. You should.
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
obviously.
around the park, so you look at Templeton, where we are, they have relatively new trees planted within that because some of them have aged out and they're gone or broken, or even at Heritage Park, we've lost trees and things. So I think there's things around the city, you know, always, I mean, I think it would have to be a plan, but we have, you know, a great sustainability group right now in Farmers Branch, and I think Alex does a great job on what they're doing, and I think that they would work in very strongly within this group, that sustainability group. They're quite, I was very impressed with them when we did the tree giveaway, their knowledge on what it is and their backgrounds, all young little whippersnappers.
So are there others with opinions that lean in a certain direction, or anyone that is more towards the flexible plan, so we hear from all different perspectives? Where are others directing these efforts?
So I just wanted to say, we're only talking about new development and redevelopment, correct?
That's the way that any zoning
So
improvement
what
would
is
end up
the,
working.
what is considered a redevelopment? How, at what point, or what do you just, if I replace my driveway, is that a redevelopment, but now I gotta use a permeable
Real paving.
pavement or something? Or how do I define what's a
Right.
I'm not talking about trees,
Okay.
just in general, like, what's considered redevelopment?
So when it's a scale, so every application, so for landscaping, it would almost have to be like you're demolishing the house and building a new house. If you're doing a partial addition to your house or a backyard patio, that's
If I
not.
wanna redevelop all my landscape, basically tear out all the landscape I have, I put in all new, does that mean I would have to abide by whatever these new parameters are?
The landscaping requirements, yes. If this landscaping provisions gets adopted, because
Sure,
right
sure, I
now,
understand.
there is no landscaping requirement
So
for
I couldn't just wipe
residential.
my slate clean and put back what I want
No.
without
what-
guidance
you
of whatever
can.
the parameters are that these new
No,
guidelines,
you
right?
would want to put back what's on the program.
That's what the CZO
That's
says,
the
is that you
guidance.
have to replace it
That's
with
the guidance
the
for
size it
you.
was at
Yeah.
original installation, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have
But
to.
in that sense, it's not a redevelopment or new development.
That's what I'm saying,
Right,
like if
that's
the
what I'm trying to
house is
understand.
fully
Talking about-
demoed,
You're
then
talking
it's.
about housing development or redevelopment.
Yes.
So if
Now,
I
if
wanted
you
to
go
wipe my front yard clear of
Not his,
everything.
not his
and
house,
put-
just his
Not my
landscape.
house, not
Yeah.
rebuild
Well,
my
you-
house, I could do whatever I want there.
So long as we do still have
To
a
meet
CZO that is in place presently,
Right,
that would
right,
at least cover
right,
that. You
right.
would have to follow
But as far
that.
as what we're talking about, these new things, we're only talking about,
No, if
Well, I think
if
the
this new
tree
stuff went into
preservation
place
would
and you did it the next day, you'd have to follow the new rules for your
even though
landscape.
I'm not
Yeah.
If he's
redeveloping
not
my
demolishing
not
his-
demoing my house, and I'm not adding on my
So the
house.
tree preservation rules would
That's
only
what-
apply to,
Because
it
nothing
wouldn't apply to
else,
existing
the tree
properties.
preserve, we are talking about landscaping, so we are talking about two
Two different
things at the
things.
same
So let's
time.
say I just want to wipe out my front yard and I want to go zero scape. Is that?
If, right now, I
That's
don't think
not really- we
xeriscape
haven't
is
talked
even
about it in
an
the program.
option.
Mm-hmm.
See, right now, I don't think xeriscape is even an option because we are defining landscaping as living, growing plant material in many cases.
Landscape is living.
Yes,
It
the
is
cactus
living.
is, but if
Yeah.
you replace everything with like rock or non-living plant material or not plant.
But what I'm
non-living.
doing is not redevelopment and it's not new development.
Right, but
But my
the,
house isn't changing at all.
Right.
yes.
I would only be restricted to those covenants, say, when I bought the house or when the house was.
Okay, so this is a conversation that would go back to the non-conforming provision that also Kira worked on in 2019. So I'm glad we're talking about it. So that's where, so your house right now is conforming from landscaping provisions. So that stays with your house. As long as the house is not being destroyed or damaged or like replaced with a new house, the site conditions, which landscaping would fall under site provisions, which was compliant, is gonna continue to
Still
be
apply.
compliant,
Not the
even if the
additional-
new conditions are adopted. However, I'm gonna give you a totally different example on a commercial property. So commercial properties, sometimes we have provisions where it says screening requirements. We added screening requirements for industrial properties for loading doors or loading areas where they're visible from street. Now on those, we had to decide, well, most of the properties are developed, so these applications are never gonna be adopted because if those industrial properties never change, then what's the point of doing screening requirements? Because we are trying to change those street views. So the provision was if that business is adding 2 or more loading doors or expanding their loading operations or service operations by a certain percentage, that's when the new rule kicks off. So it's a similar situation for residential. If you're not changing your house itself, like a full demo or rebuild, the new provisions would not apply.
So I can take both trees out of my front yard and be okay?
That's different. That's not landscape, that's tree ordinance. They're two different provisions.
Okay, so
We're
then
not getting rid of those trees.
under the tree ordinance though. No.
Under the current tree ordinance,
There is no tree ordinance
currently
right
You would
now.
be fine,
Right.
because you would be in violation maybe with your HOA, that's a different.
Well, no, my HOA doesn't have it, it's a tree, it's a PD 99 requires me to have 2 trees in my front yard.
Then you gotta have 2 trees.
yeah, so it's
So then I'd
a,
have to have, I still have to have it.
yes.
I wouldn't be in a non-conforming use, I wouldn't be a legal non-conforming use.
No,
See?
because you
I pay
created that
attention when the lawyer comes.
non-conformity. You have the issue created by yourself, the
Okay.
non-conformity.
Right, so, but it would be a non-conformity, and I would have to bring it back into conformity.
Yes.
Or be fined.
Where does it say? I'm looking forward to being punished by the municipal court.
Any zoning ordinance, the main provision is that if you don't follow the zoning requirements, your every day of violation is the standard language.
Lean on my house, I'll fix it when I sell it.
So I guess going back to Chair Ailey's questions, we kind of got an idea on some members want the full spectrum of the regulation. Some of you want kind of a in between, which is provide them some options.
I think providing
Replacement.
some options is what I would add in.
I'm all about the
I'd love to have more information. I mean, I just would love, I mean, it's like you talk about like a $3,100 to take out a tree. That's a fairly regressive tax.
Well, that's a huge tree too, right?
But I'm just saying that's,
If you
I
had
would
tree
consider it to be,
would
that would be a form of regressive taxation.
That's not a bad price.
No, but I'm just,
I don't think that pays for the
and
removal.
say Denton, if we went to visit Denton and we asked them, you know, what are your actual results? This is your ordinance, I see your ordinance, but what's happened? What are the things that you like about it? What don't you like about it? You know, it's just like, it's just, this is being presented so quickly with very you know, with no real information for me to grab a hold of to make a decision on, other than I like trees, so I want to go, you know, I want the big one. You know.
If I'm hearing you correctly, I think what you want to see is more of the research material.
Yeah, I'd just
more
like to
of
see
the-
some more of impacts. What is it like living in each of these? What are the pros and cons? What's happening in Denton? How do they feel about it? Is, you know, if they did it, would they do the same thing today? Or would they do it differently, you know?
Tree board is just too much government oversight.
Well, and I will speak to that from my own personal experience. So I have, for many, many years, lived in the city of Atlanta, which has an even stronger than Denton tree policy, because the city of Atlanta considers itself the city in a forest. Not just a city in a park, but a city in a forest. And having lived in that and been a homeowner and had that, to your point, you know, you're worried about unintended consequences, I think, of these policies. What I will say is that what I've seen is that they have partnered very strongly with things like their sustainability group, the handing out the trees, doing a lot of education to the citizens in ways that, and with the provisions around disease trees, et cetera. I have not seen from myself, my neighbors, and I live in Southwest Atlanta, which is, you know, it's not Buckhead, it's not North Dallas, it's closer to Oak Cliff. I have not seen it applied or realized in a way that feels like the regressive tax that I'm hearing you concerned about in the
That's
40
just one
years.
example.
Yeah.
It's just, we just got this.
It
And it
seems-
just seems very
we
quickly
need a lot more detail.
to make, you know, for me to say, which, I mean, I tend to lean in your direction, I tend to lean in, I love trees, and you're not, if you take out a big tree and replace it with 6 small ones, that's
Or
not
if
the
you
same thing.
Trim the heck out of it.
Yeah,
and
trim the
ruin
heck.
it.
So, I mean, I definitely have
Talked
that
about this
leaning.
ad nauseam.
you know.
But I think that they will work,
Been a
staff
long
will
time.
work, and then bring it back to
Yeah.
us again. So it's not,
I-
we're making
I-
a decision tonight.
And I would like
I was
more
just
information.
gonna say that this isn't, we aren't at the adoption stage or official consideration stage. That does occur through a public hearing. This is, so we're just looking for some feedback so that what staff will do once feedback is provided is we'll go and we will start to, for lack of a better word, start to draft some policies and play around with it and see what we can find that we think in line with your feedback will work for the city of Farmers Branch. Our next step is to bring it back to you as the commission and to council, and to explain to you in the next time we're back to you, it will be probably a much more detailed presentation. You may have a draft set of provisions to read, and it'll be a more detailed conversation about our rationale for why we are suggesting the things that we're suggesting within the draft provision. So this is sort of like
What feedback are you getting
you know,
using from today?
5,000
That's what I'm trying to
foot
do.
level, you know, generally what direction should we point in? And
And that's what I'm
then,
trying to
you know,
understand.
when we get down, I mean,
See, that's what I'm
to
trying to get
provide an
to.
example.
You're saying
Yeah.
that you're gonna go off and you're gonna start making a policy recommendation, but you're taking a direction. And based on what? Based on what these two said? Based on what, I mean, which direction are you heading now? Are you heading flexible? Are you heading, what did you pull from this meeting? Which direction are you going to use as your guide? Where are you headed?
I think if
Well,
I may add, Kira, I'm sorry, if I may add a little bit, I think one of the struggle we have internally, and I think you have already sensed it, is through the presentation as well as the spirited discussion is these two projects, I was just saying this to Kira this morning, it feels like these are cursed. Because we start work on this and something happens, like, of course, the pandemic was totally unforeseen and there were commissioners who kind of are not on the board anymore. We had a lot of discussion, and again, I fully agree that the new commissioners were not privy to that discussion. But we are also sensitive to the part that there are still commissioners who are very passionate about the topics, and we respect that. We also want to make sure, because I also made that commitment that we do not want this to go like another year back. However, we also acknowledge that maybe this is almost like reopening. I hate to say this, but it's almost like reopening that discussion. But that overall 30,000 foot level direction that she wanted from all of you tonight was that gap, kind of a gap analysis, if you will, which is you have some commissioners on the board who were involved in those original discussions, and we have some commissioners who were new. So if we look at the gap, and if we see in this conversation that there is some sort of commitment of, okay, we like to hear more about this, or we do recognize this as a problem, that we do not have ordinance that has the required language, the required provisions to enforce those. And yes, there is an overall aspiration to get there. Because it could also have been a direction that, well, we honestly, I know people don't want to say that we don't care about trees, but that is an option too, right? Like they can say that it's market driven. If it's purely redevelopment focused, we're going to take that direction. We'll see how they want to treat their property. If the businesses feel they don't care about preserving trees, then let it be with them. But I think you gave her that direction, and Kira, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we got that you all are interested, you want to know more, so it wouldn't behoove us to bring maybe some more information, kind of going back, reopening those items, and hopefully beg for some more patience from the longer term commissioners, because it might appear that we are repeating those similar discussions we had before, but we do want that commitment from all of you to see that, yes, we want to spend again, this much time, this much effort, and go to a point where everyone is committed to this, and feel like they can support this ordinance moving forward.
I definitely support a tree ordinance.
Well,
of some kind.
my takeaway is that I think everybody here is on board with these items that we're talking and discussing, but I don't know if everybody's at the same level of whether we go the retain and replace or we go flexible, just because we don't have enough information just yet and enough details behind all that. So some might want the full, retain and replace, and Others might just want to do flexible or something in between, I don't know, so.
And it might
That's my
help
takeaway
us.
from what I'm hearing here around the table.
Yes, I agree, 100%. And I think what I got as my takeaway would be maybe we need to bring it as two separate discussion, like not on the same night. I think that would help us time-wise.
Yeah, I think Gio and I, Bonnie, were you here on the last, so there's three of us only on this group.
I don't know whether
No.
Chair
I
was there.
picked up at the
We're
end,
not
but I
there.
have seen some of them.
Might have been an
We're
alternate at
equally
the last
involved.
meeting where this was talked about, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Tim was still here,
Tim
so.
was here, Chairman Moore was here, Michael Driscoll was here.
Driscoll was here. Yeah.
Yeah. Quite a few.
I'm
Oh,
happy
sorry,
to
Gio.
do refreshers, but I mean, and I agree that like everybody should have a strong understanding of what's being presented and have their questions answered. But yes.
Were the three levels in the presentation of ours, or no? On our paperwork, it was not there.
It was.
Yeah.
It was
yeah,
there,
yeah.
okay, I'm trying to remember.
Can I throw in an observation? Looking at the map. This vast majority of Farmers Branch is not gonna defoliate because people have to pull trees down next to their house. This is where the heat island is. This is where there's no tree canopy. I suggest we leave the residents alone and concentrate on that area.
West Side.
Now, there's redevelopment in this center area. I'm for including everybody.
I think if they took another picture in 2 years, that's not gonna change visibly. It's not gonna make any difference in the carbon dioxide absorption or anything else. It's that area that's all buildings. It's that area that's all concrete. That's what we should be concerned about.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if you want to put more trees in my neighborhood, just not in my front yard.
And while you're at it, you can take the one out of mine.
But that's, I think we come down to, I think that these here on the same night are also, the reason they're here on the same night as they are, also intertwined, because of, I think that what we're trying to do is, we've got landscape and the tree is one specific part of an overall landscape thing. And sort of these cannot, we need to.
Can't be divided.
They can't be divided. We probably should discuss them separately, but then they'll come back together constantly. Because looking at a comprehensive landscaping thing, especially with, they're gonna put a new townhome development in, we're watching the apartments go up. If anything about that is gonna change, we want that to be sustainable. We want that to be rain gardening. I remember we talked about pavement for parking lots or something like that.
We've talked about that ever since I've been here.
I know, and so,
Also, yeah.
and then that, I think, leads into the conversation about why are we doing trees? Not just because they're pretty, but because heat island, carbon dioxide, property value, it's
Water retention.
water retention. These things are mashed together. So could we, I mean, I hate to take this out of planning and zoning, but is there a way that we could get an arborist, a parking lot hydrologist, somebody else, some more knowledge in here, but that is beyond planning as to why we want to do these things, to educate us on, because that tree ring thing, I'd never seen that before.
Really?
Really?
Yeah, I do
Yeah,
personal injury,
most
not
of the-
plant law.
Yeah, most-
So, but, I mean, I only know that as the tree goes out as far as the roots, so, okay, but then there's
Goes further,
there's
yeah.
more than that. I think there's some education on what and why we're doing would be necessary, beyond planning and zoning.
You need to take a class.
So I think.
somewhere.
I need to go, yeah, Commissioner Rayner, do you have a?
I don't think we can educate in here as to
DCC
why.
class on this one?
And I think that we need to let our sustainability group and the knowledge that we have around the table realize that these are good. And we see the things that have happened. If you look at the spring area, that they're just now putting in more apartments, we've lost most of those trees around that spring area, right over north of Luby's. And so we tried to save those, and some things went into it. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that, but we've done a lot of this already in educating as to why we do the things that we do. And anyway, let's just go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kira?
Yeah.
Did you get what you needed?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
I hope your kids don't get up for a couple of hours.
Get some sleep.
Yes, yes, I will. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. So I think, as discussed before, we'll pick up with item A4 downstairs and complete our study session, and then we'll pick up with the regular meeting subsequently.
Thank you. Welcome to the City of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We're actually going to pick up an item from our study session meeting before we begin our regular session this evening with item A4, discuss and receive presentation from staff regarding upcoming public engagement push number 2 activities related to the citywide comprehensive plan update. Shrupa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Shrupa Sen, Deputy Director of Planning. First of all, thank you so much for everyone in attendance for being patient with us, with staff, as well as the presentations. It took a little longer than we anticipated. So the item that I really wanted to discuss with you tonight is regarding Citywide Comprehensive Plan Update, Public Engagement Push number 2. So as you know, we are going through the comprehensive plan update process. It's about an overall 15 to 18 month long process, and that flow chart at the bottom shows we are right now on phase 2. The phase 1 engagement activity kicked off in August, and most of you were part of that engagement process. And we are gearing up for the second phase of activities to be happening in the upcoming month of December. So kind of refresh, a little bit of refresher. We had a hugely successful engagement of come and go format, open house type workshop on August 4th. There were several interactive activities where staff and consultants discussed with residents in kind of interesting ways, like what is your 6-word story for the future of Farmers Branch, what you love in Farmers Branch, what you want more of, what you want less of. There was a bucket exercise for implementation trade-offs. And through all that exercise, as I shared with the commission last time when we discussed comprehensive plan, we heard from the residents, attendees, as well as the online survey feedback, what was said. Now for the phase 2 engagement activity, as a result of our analysis of current conditions within the area as well as in the region, as well as population feedback, from the residents and businesses, we have a draft vision and goal statement that the consultants and staff would like to test again with the residents and see, did we hear you right? So first of all, we'll again talk with the interested stakeholders like our businesses, our major employers, our Chamber of Commerce, our main interest groups. So there will be 2 focus group discussions. There are 4 workshops planned. In your packet, I have included an outline of all the engagement activities and kind of what each of them are. Workshops are more like walking workshops. So we have planned 4 workshops, 4 different workshops, one in the east side, one in the Belline corridor, one within the Valwood neighborhood, and one in the Four Corners area. Now these areas were identified by our consultants who are leading this study effort through their existing conditions analysis as well as what the people talked about. So during these workshops, members of staff as well as the consultant team will be physically present there. And in your packet, I have included not only the flyer, which is on your screen, advertising kind of the synopsis of all the activities, but also the postcards that have been mailed to the area residents and businesses for these 4 workshop areas. So I have an example on the second slide. This is for the East Side workshop. So the back of the postcard would have a map kind of showing the route, and the front of the workshop will have like a generic invite to join your neighbors for an immersive walk, to identify how streets and sites can be improved for existing and future residents of the city, what will make these truly complete communities. So these are going to be more of a interactive dialogue-based where we will talk with the people. Everyone is invited, as well as the area residents and businesses, to these workshops. And if their schedule permits, then we'll walk with them and kind of experience those physical features, those sites, those streets, those sidewalks or the lag thereof, those street trees or the lag thereof, and what kind of amenities are lacking or what kind of amenities are there that we want to celebrate. Now going back, so those are the workshops, and then the second community workshop, similar format like the last one. It's on Wednesday, December 7th, between 6:30 and 8. It's a come and go. Based on your schedule or your availability, you can come, kind of walk through different stations, participate in those activities that they have planned. The reason we don't have those activities laid out in front of you right now, or for anyone for that matter, is because there is also the element of surprise. We want to keep those exercise and activities a bit of a secret till the workshop night. I haven't seen them as well. But we will have a really good interactive activity where we will focus on land use, mobility, housing, all those key areas that the comprehensive plan will address. It's scheduled at the Farmers Branch Recreation Center at 14050 Hartside Place. All of us have visited the rec center. It has amazing meeting spaces, so one of those meeting facilities will have the workshop there. Also, we are planning 2 employer pop-up events where we'll have a little table set up where we are trying to capture employees like when they're in action, like during their lunch break or during the evening when they're leaving from work, to catch them for like 2 minutes or 5 minutes if they can fill out like just some responses, jot down on a board, tell us what, while they're working here, they might not live here, but what are the things that they lack or need or would like to have. So that's also planned. So it's 2 days of intense activities, and you all are welcome. And please, as I mentioned this to City Council, I'm mentioning this to the Commission, we need your help in spreading the word because we can only do so much. We have it on the city's website. We are going to advertise it on our social media outlets. However, the best kind of marketing or advertisement we can get is through you all. I have some flyers here with me. We have more of them upstairs in the planning suite if you want to have more to give out to. Give them with you if you want to spread them out. If you want to hand those flyers to your friends and neighbors, please feel free to hand them out. Also, I wanted to show on our website, which I'm surprised this one.
How else are they handing these out? I know that they're having some area meetings like for Area 4 and whatever. Would those be handed out at those?
I believe
Councilman could do them?
you are speaking of a council member town hall?
Yeah,
Richard
town
Jackson?
hall, yeah.
Yes, I believe he asked me for the copy of the flyer, so I have sent it to him digitally.
Okay.
So I'm sure he will have some of those available there. Besides that, we have also, I know Brian today has left a bunch of those flyers in our senior center, our rec center, the library, and then last week I put some of them in the utility bill area where people come to pay their utility bill, and the community services where you apply for permit. Yes, did I miss any question? No. And then the last but not the least is, this is our homepage. So of course, during these activity phases, we request them to put this comprehensive plan specific banner on our homepage. So anyone who opens our Farmers Branch website, they can see the comprehensive plan logo, banner, and if they click on this Learn More button, it takes you to the comprehensive plan webpage. The flyer is also listed here, so you can download the flyer, the same flyer I just handed out, and print it from there, or see this Phase 2 engagement link, which is also on the left. So if you click on that link, it has more detailed information in terms of the workshop, and each of the workshop map is also accessible through that webpage. So there are several ways you can find the same kind of information. And there will be an online survey as well. We will start it during that same time when the workshop is happening, and we'll keep it open throughout the end of the year for online feedback. So that's all I have for you tonight for the Comprehensive Plan Engagement Activity Phase 2. And I'll be happy to answer any question. We are excited for another successful engagement activity. Thank you. Yes.
Just going back to I think the first slide you had, you said there's a bike shop. Is there a bike option as well for?
We listed it as workshop or bike shop, meaning that if someone wants to ride their bike, while others are
At one of
walking,
those,
they
They
can.
could bring or use their bike, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the other question I had is, have you made any provisions or anything for the elderly or less mobile people that live in the city that might want to participate in these walks somehow, that you can accommodate them?
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the council members also asked us that question. So since then, we learned that our police department actually have some golf carts. So I've reached out to, Chief Hill mentioned that. So I'm trying to reserve, if we can, for the
Okay, and
workshop.
is-
So if there is need, they have two.
They have two, but the fire department may have some.
I think.
know when we do events, when we do events at the historical park, I know that the police has two, and then, but there's others there. So I think the city has some also, maybe Parks Department or something like that. I would inquire there.
The
Children's
hayride.
Sorry?
The children's hayride.
Children's hayride, I haven't been
Well,
to that one, you'd know. But sure, so we are looking for other
Okay, yeah.
options of
I'm
transportation.
glad you're looking into that, but
Yes.
in addition to that, has that in some way been communicated to the citizens that, hey, if you need assistance in this regard, whether it be on the flyer or emails or some other avenue that you've communicated to citizens that may be handicapped or, can't walk that far, or?
Unfortunately, the workshop postcard itself does not mention that there will be other modes of accommodations available because we did not plan it that way. Originally, it was planned for it to be actually walking or biking, where it's more active involvement.
So you're planning for the golf carts, but you haven't notified anybody that they can use the golf carts?
So if there is someone with the need, we are assuming that they will inform us, and then they will be allowed to ride on the golf cart. It's not just for select participants.
Okay, and then,
Well, I think if you put it out that we have golf carts, you may have a lot of people and not have enough transportation in a golf
Yes.
cart.
Yep.
You just have to come to ride the golf cart. I do want them, but if you advertise it, I'm going to go on the golf cart.
If I may, because I also attended the stakeholder advisory committee where this came up, the questions and the information presented there, while yes, there will be the opportunity to view the site and specific, the feedback that will be collected will be very similar to what's at the workshop itself, the second community workshop. It need not be the only options for someone to participate, and they'll be able to make commentary on those same issues in that community workshop in the way that they're asking the questions, which could even be more applicable to where that individual lives rather than these sites, potentially.
yeah, I'm just concerned that there may be elderly folk that don't have the ability to get to even see these kinds of areas to derive, ideas and information from. So I just want to make sure that we reach out to them and provide for them somehow that they can participate if they so choose.
I think the Senior Citizen Center has a van, don't they?
They do.
transport people in?
I believe so.
Other
I
questions?
think Commissioner Martin had a question.
I'm way in the back. Are there alternative dates established for inclement weather?
That's a very good question. We experienced that with our last P&Z retreat. Right now, there aren't, but if there will be like really bad weather on, say, December 7th, which is the workshop date, then we will definitely have to reschedule.
Okay.
But living in Texas, early December might not be that bad, but again, you never know.
Yeah.
And this kind of activities, unfortunately, we have to like plan like month or 2 months ahead, so.
Absolutely. Okay.
Any other? Go ahead, Bonnie.
The employer pop-up events, and I might have not heard what you said, but these are going to be in like static locations, like so people
Yes.
that might have limited mobility could also attend the employer pop-ups, or are they just for like?
These are
staff?
primarily targeted for the employees, because we are trying to also get that segment a Farmers Branch, because most of, as you can see, the activities are geared towards residents, or like current residents or renters. However, the people who work in Farmers Branch, not necessarily stay in or live in Farmers Branch, they're also important member of the community. So these employer pop-ups are mainly focused for the employees. So I'm not necessarily foreseeing that as residents are also going to go. Because in a particular employment location, it's not always open to everyone. We are asking for their permission to host that pop-up, but
Thank you.
it's not going to be open to everyone.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Shrupa. I hope everyone will find a way to be involved in one of these activities, and I think many, or if not most, all of us were in attendance at the first one, and so I think we look forward to similar attendance and excitement from everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to item A5, discuss agenda items for future Planning and Zoning Commission consideration. Commissioners, any items for future consideration?
I do have one thing, and at our next meeting, if we could get a schedule for 2023, it would be appreciated.
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, thank you so much for that. We are working on that schedule. However, we were hoping to get the city council's calendar for next year before we finalize our dates or propose our next year's date, but that calendar has not been presented to council yet. We will still present a draft calendar to the commission at the December meeting, but knowing that there might be some changes once the council calendar is adopted, which wouldn't happen till December. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. We will now move to our regular meeting. So thank you all again for your patience. So that brings us to item B, citizen comments. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on any matter that is not posted on the agenda. Anyone wishing to address the commission should complete a citizen comments registration form and submit it to the chair prior to the start of the meeting. There's a 3-minute time limit for each citizen to speak, with a reasonable limitation on speakers on one topic or item, with a maximum of 15 total minutes on the same topic item. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. The Planning and Zoning Commission is not permitted to take action on any subject raised by a speaker during citizen comments. However, the Planning and Zoning Commission may have the item placed on a future agenda for action, refer the item to the Director of Planning for future study or action, briefly state existing city policy, or provide a brief statement of factual information in response to the inquiry. And we do have a citizen today. So Patricia, would you please come forward? Patricia Link. And for the record, please state your address as well.
My name is Patricia Link. I live at 3312 Chaparral. So a little bit of history. I am the lead for Keep Farmers Branch Beautiful. So you know just from that and all the volunteer work that we've done that trees are at my heart. However, I missed some of the study session conversation, but I wanted to address a couple of topics here. So in your flexible tree proposal, it says that some cities did not apply I should have my glasses, provisions to single-family and duplex lots. To follow up on a conversation that Mike had, you want to make sure that your solution is in proportion to the problem. So maybe a beginning point is with the commercial properties and not necessarily the residential, if you're not seeing that the problem is really there. We built on, I just moved into a new home. We built on a property that was basically undeveloped. It had one very, very old house. And Linda, you may recall that you actually were walking your dog and came by and visited with us about the trees. A lot of the trees had to be taken down. Some were just trash trees. A lot of them were completing for light and so on, and they were not able to be saved. However, when you say here that the removal of healthy trees, applications for removal of healthy trees versus diseased trees, who's going to be the determinant of that? Is it going to be an arborist? You know, that can get into a kind of a dicey conversation. We had 2 trees specifically that I could not put my arms around. I called one Libby, my Let It Be tree, that when the building process made me crazy, I literally went out and hugged this tree. However, we had multiple arborists that said, you're going to end up with it on your house, it's got to come down. But they said it probably wouldn't be for 5 years. So when you get into a time frame like that, is it healthy now? Is it going to be sick later? What's going to happen? Same thing is, I would recommend that you look at development and putting the orange netting around the trees and having the builders actually do that. We did that, and then we had a couple of morons that actually pulled down the netting, drove over the tree roots, and then just left the netting the way it was. So holding builders accountable for those kinds of things would be really helpful. And then, let's see, your tree giveaway. So I read something about caliper of trees should be 3 inches, that a new tree being put in should be at least that. Your tree giveaway, were they a caliper of 3 inches? You want to make sure that there's alignment between what you're recommending and then another part of the city. And then if you take out a tree and you have to replace it with a certain caliper size, there's no way. We couldn't have put our arms around these trees. It would take tens of thousands of dollars in order to replace those trees, either with a similar tree, which is not feasible, or multiple trees of the same caliber. You'd have a forest out there for so many of these trees. So as you kind of think about some of these things, keep that in mind. I just want to speak I may be running over, but speak just briefly to one point on your landscaping, that your landscaping plan may be able to be implemented more quickly if you look at any new house that's being built. And not only that, but also any sales, because then it could be the responsibility of, before you give a certificate of occupancy, that you make sure that the new homeowner is going to have a landscape plan in alignment with what you all are trying to do. I think that's it. The last point would be that for courtesy to the people, the residents that have come for these meetings, if you communicate that you're going to start at 7, please kind of wrap up your study session so that you can do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate it. That will take us to our regular agenda items. Item C1, consider approval of the October 17th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes and take appropriate action. Anyone want to make a motion?
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Second.
Second. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? All right, carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Item C2, consider the request for 4480 Alpha LLC for final plat approval of Prescott 4480 Alpha Edition, Lot 1, Block A, addressed at 4480 Alpha Road, and take appropriate action.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sarah Bergman, Senior Planner. Like you mentioned, item C2 is a proposed final plat for property located at 4480 Alpha Road. You can see it highlighted on the screen here. It's located on the south side of Alpha Road near the intersection with Beta Road. The site is 0.92 acres in size, and it is zoned light industrial. The plat itself is fairly straightforward. If approved, this would create one new lot, being Lot 1, Block A of the Prescott 4480 Alpha Edition. You can see it here on the screen. There are a few small utility easements along the northern property line along Alpha Road. But other than that, it just creates one new lot. This plat does meet all state and local requirements for platting, and staff recommends approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Sarah? All right, seeing none, I entertain a motion. Further discussion?
Approve the final plat for.
Approve the final plat for Prescott 4480 Alpha Edition as presented.
Second?
A second.
Second for Bonnie. Any further discussion on this replat? All right, seeing none, we'll move to all those all those in favor? All right, thank you very much. And that brings us to adjournment. It is presently 8:10 p.m. Thank you again, commissioners and citizens, for your attention and patience.